We are using up some small eggs from our new egg-laying hens this week to make pickled eggs. If you are new here, my name is Karyn and my husband Dan and I are trying to become as self-sufficient as we possibly can before we retire. This year we added 18 new hens to our flock, and I believe they have all started to lay eggs now. Of course, when a hen first starts to lay eggs, they are quite a bit smaller than what a mature hen would lay. We had been using these smaller eggs for breakfast, but Dan and I only really eat a breakfast meal on the weekend, and so we've amassed quite a few of these small eggs. But Dan and I think these would be the perfect 1 or 2 bite pickled eggs, and the flavor will be able to penetrate these smaller eggs more quickly than a medium or a large egg. So in this video, we are going to pickle these eggs with a recipe that I tweaked, and it is better than any pickled egg recipe I have used before. If you have been here quite a while, you would know that I did a pickled eggs video a couple of years ago, but now this recipe is my go-to recipe for pickling eggs. And in that older video, I did mention over 40 add-ins that you could use possibly on pickled eggs. So you may want to check that out. And if you do, I am going to link to that video at the end of this one and in the description of this video. After we pickle these eggs, I'm going to talk about how long it takes for them to get a good flavor and also how long these will last. Today we're going to make 2 half-gallon jars, but you can adjust this recipe to fit any jars that you have or have saved up. This is a great use for old pickle jars that you might be saving, and we'll be sitting these in the fridge to cure. So as long as you've got a lid that fits properly on top of the jar, you'll be good. For this recipe, we'll be using 2 large onions or an equal amount of smaller onions. I've got 6 small to medium onions here, but I will say I did have some onions left over. I think 4 medium size would have been enough. Then we have 4 large cloves of garlic, or you can use an equal amount of small. I have small garlic cloves here. 4 large jalapenos. There will be 2 jalapenos in each of my half-gallon jars. Dan likes heat and he wants a little more heat in this batch, and so I have 4 habanero peppers here, and we're going to put 2 of those in each half-gallon jar. I've also got some pickling spice and some fresh dill, and then white vinegar, distilled water, and either pickling or canning salt will be for the brine. We don't want to use iodized salt because that can affect the flavor over time. I enlisted Dan to do the chopping while I focused on boiling up all of the eggs so that the process would go a little bit faster. Dan loves, along with the fact that there are pickled eggs, that there are also pickled onions and pickled garlic and pickled jalapenos that he can use as a great side dish to any meal he might have, and they're also really great on top of a burger. Now let's get to chopping. Dan peeled and chopped all of the onions into thicker slices. We want bigger pieces so that these are easier to remove from the jar for munching or on that burger. And then he cut those slices in half. Next, Dan's working on the garlic cloves, peeling and then rough chopping these. And finally, he's chopping up the peppers. Since we've got some hot peppers in the mix, gloves are in order. I'm sure you know the drill with peppers. Especially keep it away from your eyes and wash your hands thoroughly afterwards. While Dan is cutting everything up, I've been busy working on boiling 68 of these smaller eggs. I can fit 15 large eggs in a half-gallon jar with this recipe, and since these are smaller, I just don't know how many eggs I will need. There will also be some of these eggs that won't be usable for pickled eggs. Generally, eggs that have any exposed yolk, either through a crack or an exposed part on the egg are not as safe as using eggs without exposed yolks. This is because the yolk can dissolve into the brine, and what happens then is that the yolk makes the brine not as acidic. We want a good acidic environment to get the pickling going and to keep out any sort of bacteria. So if we have exposed yolks, there's a greater possibility of bacteria and spoilage, even that bad botulism bacteria. We've got everything prepped now, including those eggs peeled. So now it's time to start layering our jars. Since I am making 2 half-gallon jars, I divided up everything that Dan had chopped into 2 separate piles. There will be 3 layers of this chopped stuff in each jar. So first I'm taking 1/3 of the onions and putting that in. Then of course 1/3 of the pile of garlic and also the peppers, putting that in the bottom of the jar. Now I'm adding some pickling spice and a sprig of the fresh dill. I'm using about 2 tablespoons of pickling spice altogether per jar. After you get that first layer in there, if you've got something that's long handled, or if your hand and arm can fit in the mouth of the jar, reach in there or use something and kind of tamp down that first layer if you can. That just helps you to fit in more eggs. Now we're going to add 8 eggs, and we're just eyeballing here to see how many we can fit in. I'm just going to repeat that process now at least 2 more times to see how much I can fit in this jar. On these layers, you can carefully, gently push down on them to make sure that you're getting kind of a tighter fit, but be careful because you don't want to put any cracks in those eggs. And sometimes when I get to the top, if I have anything left over, I'll just chuck that in the top. I ended up getting about 23 of these smaller eggs in my half-gallon jar. Of course, I repeated that process for the second jar, and then I'm just going to cover them a little bit while I work on the brine. For 2 half-gallon jars, we're going to need 6 cups of white vinegar, 3 cups of the distilled water, and then 4 tablespoons of our pickling or canning salt. You could also use a good sea salt. I'm letting this salt dissolve and letting it come to a boil. Then I'm going to boil it for a good 5 minutes so that I can make sure we are rid of anything bacteria-wise in our brine. And now I'm going to remove that from the heat and use my ladle and canning funnel to fill up these jars. We want to make sure that they are filled completely to the top so that there is nothing exposed as far as food. Keeping it under that brine will keep it safe to eat and keep it pickling. Then just add the lid, let it cool a little bit, and then I'll put it in the fridge. Now I feel like it's important to mention, why am I putting it in the fridge? Eggs are very dense. They're not like using a cucumber to make a pickle. It takes a long time for that brine to soak through that egg and get to the yolk. And there is a bit of controversy here because some people say they're just fine on the counter or canned and shelf stable because people used to do that all of the time. But with today's safety standards, it is recommended that you pickle eggs in the refrigerator, but you do you, whatever you think is best. So how long will it take before I have some good seasoned pickled eggs? These small eggs should have a pretty good seasoned flavor after about 3 weeks. If I were doing medium or large size, I would say more like 4 or 5 weeks. But there are also those that say after 4 weeks or 5 weeks, they're just getting started. Unfortunately, you'll have to test one every now and then. And how long will they last in the fridge? They will last at least 3 to 4 months in the fridge. And as with anything, you'll want to check for signs of spoilage before you consume anything and give it the old sniff test. It really just depends how good your process was, how good your ingredients are, and how long it will last in your fridge. So who is going to be pickling some eggs out there? Do you have a recipe or add-ins that you can share? Leave that in the comments for me. And I will be seeing you this weekend for a 4-month update on my weight loss journey. And because it's 4 months, I will also be doing measurements to see inches lost and also posting some before and after pictures. I'll see you then.